The road was a ribbon of gray, swallowed at both ends by heavy fog. Eleanor gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles pale in the dim light of the dashboard. Her phone sat useless in the passenger seat, the map app frozen on a blue arrow lost in blank space. No signal. No movement. Just static. The forest that pressed in on both sides of the road felt too close. The trees leaned in like eavesdropping strangers, their silhouettes clawing against the thickening mist. She hadn't passed another car in nearly an hour. When the engine started to stutter, just once, panic had crept in like ice through a cracked window. And then, as if summoned by that very panic, a faint light appeared up ahead. Flickering. Warm. Human. She pulled off the narrow road, gravel crunching under her tires, and followed a winding, upward path. The fog thickened the higher she climbed, until it felt less like mist and more like breath, damp and watching. At the top of the hill stood a tall, narrow building. The inn at Greystone Hollow. It was like something from an oil painting, withered, romantic, and strangely alive. The wooden sign creaked on rusted chains, swaying slightly in a breeze Eleanor could not feel. She stepped out of the car. Silence. Not even insects. Not even wind. Just the hiss of the lone gas lamp outside the front door, casting golden light across ancient stone steps. She hesitated, fingers brushing her coat pocket, feeling the dead weight of her phone. No help coming. No other light for miles. She walked to the door. It opened before she could knock. Standing in the threshold was a woman in her 60s, maybe older, thin, upright, and dressed in antique black. Her hair was pinned back in an old-fashioned twist. Her eyes were a cloudy gray, unreadable and too still. "Come in," she said, her voice quiet, measured. "You look cold." Eleanor stepped inside. The warmth hit her first, dry heat, like from an old boiler, but beneath it, a smell lingered. Beeswax, lavender, and something faintly musty, like books sealed in a chest for decades. The lobby was dim but beautiful. Old wood paneling, thick velvet drapes, a Persian rug worn smooth by countless footsteps. No radio. No music. Just a large grandfather clock that ticked in the corner with a sound like a deep breath. "I wasn't planning to stop," Eleanor said. "My car." "Room 313, the woman interrupted gently, as though she'd heard it 100 times before. She turned, her black skirt swaying, and took a key from a shadowy hook behind the desk. "Top floor. End of the hall." Eleanor opened her mouth to object, but something about the woman's tone made her hesitate. The key was iron. Heavy. Cold. "I'm Eleanor," she offered softly, unsure why. The woman only smiled. "We remember all our guests." Eleanor stood a moment longer in the lobby, the key resting in her palm like a small weight. It was unusually cold, even in the warmth of the room. Not just metal-chilled. But wrong, somehow. It felt like something that had been lost for years, buried beneath stone or ice. She turned it over, expecting maybe a room number scratched on its face, but it was blank, just a rusted loop and a key cut deep with narrow teeth. The woman behind the desk, if she'd given a name, Eleanor hadn't caught it, watched her with a look that wasn't quite welcoming, but not unfriendly either. Like a portrait that had seen too much and no longer cared to judge. Eleanor cleared her throat. "Is there anyone else staying here?" The woman paused, one hand resting on the counter's surface. "Some prefer not to be seen," she said, her voice nearly lost under the tick of the grandfather clock. "But yes. You're not alone." The answer wasn't comforting. Eleanor nodded, awkward, and stepped toward the narrow staircase leading upward. Her footsteps echoed strangely, even on the carpet. The air on the second floor was cooler. The third, colder still. At the landing, the hallway stretched long and dim, the gas sconces casting flickering shadows that didn't seem to match her movement. Room 313 waited at the very end. Its door was tall and slightly warped, as though the wood had swelled and shrunk over a century of seasons. The number above the frame was carved directly into the wood, no plaque, no nails. The numerals looked old-fashioned, almost hand-chiseled, and the grain around them was darker than the rest, like it had absorbed something long ago. She slid the key into the lock. It resisted, just a little, like a door reluctant to wake. Then, click, it turned with a metallic sigh, and the door swung open on its own. The room beyond was surprisingly large. An antique bed with a high headboard sat against the wall, its thick quilt tucked neatly. A long window with velvet drapes looked out onto nothing but fog. There was a standing mirror in the corner, a clawfoot wardrobe, and a single chair next to a writing desk. No TV. No alarm clock. No outlets. She stepped inside. The floor creaked once beneath her, and the door slowly closed behind her without a sound. Eleanor turned. The handle didn't move. Eleanor stared at the door for a moment longer, her hand resting on the knob. She turned it again, gently this time, not wanting to admit what she already knew. Locked. From the outside. Her breath caught, but she swallowed it down. It's old, she told herself. Maybe the door's warped. Maybe the lock just stuck when it closed. She gave the handle a firmer twist, nothing. Then she noticed something else, there was no deadbolt. No latch. Just the heavy knob, set into wood darker than the rest of the door. Old wood. Almost black around the edges, as though it had soaked in oil, or something thicker. Eleanor took a step back. The mirror in the corner caught her movement. It stood nearly 6 feet tall, framed in curved mahogany, the kind of thing you'd find in a Victorian bedroom or an old stage dressing room. Dust speckled the surface faintly, but it didn't dull the glass's clarity. In fact, it was too clear. Eleanor could see herself perfectly, her hair damp from the fog, her coat open, her fingers still curled around the useless key. But something was off. Her reflection stood too still. She raised a hand slowly. The figure in the mirror did the same, but with a faint lag, just half a second too late. Her eyes widened, and the reflection smiled. Eleanor turned away sharply, heart thudding. No. Tired. I'm just tired, she muttered, trying to drown the sudden rise of cold beneath her ribs. She hadn't eaten since noon. She hadn't slept well in 2 days. She'd driven 5 hours into the middle of nowhere. It was just her brain, playing tricks. She set the key on the writing desk and removed her coat. The room wasn't cold, exactly, but it wasn't warm either. The kind of chill that settles into a place when no one's disturbed it in years. She rubbed her arms and walked to the window, brushing aside the curtain. Outside, fog. Thick, swirling, and too still for wind. Her reflection in the glass stared back again. Only this time, the room behind her, inside the reflection, was different. The bed was gone. The wallpaper was red. There were candles burning in the corners. And on the floor, half in shadow, was the outline of a woman in a nightgown, slumped over, unmoving. Eleanor turned around in a rush. The room behind her was normal again. The bed. The mirror. The desk. No candles. No woman. No red wallpaper. But the whisper came anyway, soft and wet, like breath pressed to her ear. It remembers you. Eleanor froze. She hadn't moved. She was sure of it. And yet the whisper, soft, breathy, intimate, still seemed to hover just behind her left shoulder. Not quite touching her, but near enough that her skin prickled like frost under a thin shirt. She turned slowly. Nothing there. No one in the room. Just the deep silence of age. She took one step toward the bed, and something creaked, not the floorboard. Not the chair. The closet. It stood to the right of the mirror, a tall, antique wardrobe with claw feet and twin doors. She hadn't opened it yet. Hadn't even considered it until now. Maybe there's a heater inside, she thought, irrationally. Maybe it's knocking from pipes or... Knock. Not loud. But it was inside. A short, dry rap. As if someone was tapping their knuckles gently against the inside of the door. Eleanor took a shaky breath. "No," she whispered aloud to no one. "No, I'm not." Knock knock. It came again. Slightly louder. More insistent. This time, she walked toward it, slowly, forcing each step. The wardrobe's finish was dark, its surface smoothed by years. She reached out, rested her fingers against one of the handles. The metal was warm. She paused. Every other surface in the room had felt cold, neglected. But this handle was warm, fresh, even. Like someone had just touched it. Recently. Maybe someone is still inside. But that was ridiculous, wasn't it? It wasn't even that big. It couldn't fit anyone. Could it? She gripped the handle. And stopped. From inside, she heard a breath. Soft. Female. Weary. Eleanor's heart slammed once against her ribs and then held itself still. She didn't open it. Instead, she backed away. Step by step. Until her legs found the edge of the bed behind her, and she sat down harder than she meant to. Silence. No more knocks. But she couldn't stop watching the wardrobe. The mirror reflected it, too, except in the mirror, the door was open. And someone's bare feet were just visible in the shadows behind it. Eleanor blinked. Once. Twice. Still there. The reflection didn't waver. The wardrobe, in the mirror, stood wide open, its carved doors yawning like twin jaws. The light in the mirrored room was darker now, tinged in reddish hue, though no such color lived in the real space behind her. And the feet. They were bare, pale, just barely visible from behind the wardrobe's doorframe. She could see the curve of one ankle, the edge of a heel. Still. Waiting. She turned her head, not daring to stand. Looked directly at the wardrobe. Closed. Of course. But when she looked back at the mirror, the feet were gone. So was the wardrobe. So was the bed. The mirror now reflected a different room entirely. Not hers, not now. It looked like the same layout, but older. Wetter. The wallpaper was curling at the seams. The ceiling was yellowed with moisture. There were cobwebs in the corners and black mold furring the baseboards. And standing against the far wall, half emerged from the plaster, as though she were being swallowed by the room itself, was a woman. She was tall and thin, wearing what might once have been a nightgown, though now it hung in ribbons. Her hair draped across her face like wet rope. Her hands were pressed flat against the wall, palms to the wood, as though she had been trying to push her way through the surface. Eleanor's breath shallowed. The woman's head turned. Only a fraction, but enough. One eye, bloodshot and wide, stared through the glass as if she could see Eleanor perfectly. And her lips, chapped, flaking, began to move. Not a whisper. Not a sound. Just the motion of words forming against empty silence. Don't sleep. Eleanor shot up from the bed, knocking the lamp off the side table. It clattered to the floor, but didn't break. When she looked up, the mirror was normal again. Her reflection blinked back at her, pale and shaking, her hands clutching her own shoulders. But behind her, in the reflection, on the far wall where the woman had stood, was now a small dark patch, no larger than a handprint. It hadn't been there before. And it wasn't in the real room. Only in the mirror. Eleanor stared into the mirror, her chest rising and falling too fast. The air in the room felt denser, heavier, as though the space itself was growing smaller, folding in around her. She glanced behind her. The wall was bare. No handprint. No wet patch. But the mirror insisted. The stain remained, dark and fresh-looking, shaped like 5 splayed fingers dragged downward. She forced herself to look away. The panic buzzing behind her eyes was rising into her throat now, bitter and metallic. She needed to leave. She crossed the room and tried the doorknob again. Still locked. She rattled it, harder this time. "Hello?" she called out, her voice cracking. "Is someone out there?" No answer. She raised her fist and pounded the wood. "Hello? I need help. This door is stuck." Nothing. Not even footsteps. Just the ticking of the distant grandfather clock on the first floor, muffled now. She pressed her forehead against the door and closed her eyes. And then... Rearing. Eleanor flinched hard. It was a phone. Loud. Sharp. Invasive. It rang from inside the room. But, there was no phone. She'd looked. There was no base, no cord, no outlet, not even a jack in the wall. Still. Rearing. It was coming from the desk drawer. She turned slowly. Walked across the room. The drawer handle was old brass, shaped like a lion's head with a ring through its mouth. Her fingers hovered over it, trembling. The phone rang again, closer this time, deeper. It sounded like it was right beneath the wood. She pulled. Inside the drawer was a rotary phone. Black, pristine. Sitting on a velvet lining that hadn't been there when she'd entered the room. It didn't match the dust of the rest of the room. It was too clean. And it was still ringing. She stared at it for one beat too long. Then, without knowing why, she picked up the receiver. "Hello?" Silence. Then. "You shouldn't have come here alone." The voice was low, strained, like it was being pulled up from the bottom of a well. It was a woman's voice. It sounded tired. And then the line went dead. Eleanor dropped the receiver. It bounced once and fell silent. She looked down. The drawer was empty. No phone. Nothing. Eleanor stood motionless, hands still extended over the drawer. The silence after the call was louder than the ring had been. No wind. No pipes. No hum of electricity. Just a hollow quiet, like the room had taken a breath and was holding it. Then came the smell. It started faint, familiar, even pleasant, lavender. Sweet and dry, like fresh sachets in an old drawer. But then, it thickened. Grew warmer. Heavier. The scent deepened into something more pungent. Sharp. Burning. Lavender oil poured over open flame. Eleanor had smelled it once, in a yoga studio that caught fire after someone left a candle burning too long. That same sickly sweet sting now filled the air of room 313, coiling into her lungs. She turned in a slow circle. Nothing was smoking. Nothing was visibly burning. But she could feel heat. Just beneath the floorboards. Like something smoldered underfoot. She dropped to her knees and touched the wood. Warm. The wood beneath her palm was warmer than it should have been, especially in a room that had felt so cold just moments before. She pressed her ear to the floor. And heard something. A crackle. A whispering hiss, like kindling catching. Like breath passing over dry petals. And then. A low, rhythmic sound began beneath her. Thud. 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 Like footsteps. Slow. Measured. From underneath. But the inn didn't have a basement, did it? She hadn't seen one from the outside. No lower windows, no slope in the hill. Still, the footsteps walked beneath her floor, pacing from one end of the room to the other, as if someone were trapped in a narrow crawlspace, just out of reach. She stood quickly, backing away from the center of the room. Her eyes scanned the corners, the floor, the walls. And then she saw it. On the wall near the bed, just above the floorboards, a small black slit had appeared. No wider than a matchbook. It hadn't been there before. As she watched, a thin tendril of smoke curled out of it. And something scratched at the other side. The scratching was faint at first. Eleanor stood rooted, eyes locked on the black slit at the base of the wall. Smoke still curled from it, thin, gray, and sweetly acrid, like scorched perfume. Then the scratching grew louder. Not random. Rhythmic. Deliberate. Scrape. Scrape. Like nails. Long ones. Moving back and forth slowly, just inches behind the wall. She backed away until the backs of her knees hit the bed. Her throat was dry. No, she whispered aloud, as though denying it would undo it. There's no one there. But there was. Because now, underneath the scratching, came a voice. It was so soft she thought at first it was the wind, until she realized there was no wind. Not outside. Not here. The curtains didn't even move. The voice was whispering something, a chant or a phrase, just under the edge of comprehension. Down here, she waits. Eleanor's breath caught. She took one step closer to the wall. The heat had faded now. The wood felt cool again, but the whisper grew stronger. In the dark where she was left. It was a woman's voice. Same as before, strained, low, and sad. Not threatening. Not cruel. Just, tired. Like it had been whispering too long, for too many years. Eleanor dropped to her knees again and pressed her ear against the wall. She knows the names, she remembers yours. Her name. Did it say her name? She recoiled suddenly, as though bitten. The wall felt alive. Not moving, but listening. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Then the slit grew wider. Just by an inch. And something slid through. It was a note. A piece of old, folded paper, aged to a pale brown. The corners curled. The edges burned. It came out slowly, like being passed through invisible fingers. She stared at it. It had no writing on the outside. With shaking hands, Eleanor picked it up and unfolded it. One sentence was scrawled across the center in a trembling hand. Don't sleep in the bed. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she folded the note slowly, almost reverently, and tucked it into her coat pocket. The room felt colder now, the warmth from moments ago slipping away like mist. She rose to her feet, heart pounding. Every creak of the floorboards echoed in the silence. A sudden noise caught her attention. Footsteps. Light. Tentative. Above her. The floor above. The attic? She hadn't heard anyone else arrive. The inn's first floor was empty when she checked in, save for the woman at the desk who seemed almost part of the building itself. No other guests. No other staff. The footsteps paced slowly, coming closer and then retreating. Eleanor's breath hitched. Her hand went to the doorknob. Still locked. She pressed her ear against the door again. The footsteps stopped. A heavy silence fell, thicker than the fog outside. Then, a whisper from the hall. Soft. Fragile. She's watching. Eleanor's eyes darted to the mirror. The glass shimmered faintly. Her reflection blinked twice. And smiled. Eleanor swallowed hard, her eyes glued to the mirror. The smile there was slow, deliberate, and far too knowing, like a secret that had been waiting centuries to be told. Her own lips did not move. The reflection was a stranger. Her fingers tightened around the door handle again. No matter how much she wrenched and pulled, it didn't budge. It was as if the door was sealed by something more than just a rusty lock. Suddenly, a cold D. Then, a whisper, faint but clear, floated into the room from the hallway. "You don't belong here." Eleanor staggered back, heart hammering in her chest. Her eyes searched the room for the source of the voice, but the shadows only deepened. The gas lamp in the hallway flickered violently, casting twisted shapes on the peeling wallpaper. And in the mirror, her reflection watched her, unblinking, lips curled into that unnerving smile. Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned away from the locked door, her gaze landing on the small writing desk by the window. Among the dust and scattered papers lay a brass candle holder with a half-melted candle still inside it. She reached for it, desperate for any source of light beyond the flickering gas sconces in the hallway. She struck a match. The flame sprang to life with a soft flare, casting a warm, wavering glow that pushed back the shadows in the room, just a little. The scent of burning wax mingled oddly with the lingering smell of lavender smoke. Eleanor's eyes darted nervously toward the mirror. This time, her reflection didn't smile. Instead, it seemed to shrink, as if recoiling from something just beyond the glass. A faint tapping sounded from the closet. Eleanor's breath caught. She moved slowly toward it, the candlelight trembling in her hand. The tap came again, 3 soft raps, like a cautious knock. With a shaking hand, she reached for the wardrobe door. The brass handle was warm beneath her fingers. She pulled it open. Inside was darkness. A faint, cold draft drifted out, carrying the scent of old paper and something else, something metallic and faintly sour. At the back of the wardrobe hung a faded garment, its fabric threadbare and stained. Eleanor reached out to touch it and recoiled as the candle flame flickered violently, threatening to go out. Behind the garment, pinned to the wood, was a small folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully. In neat, looping handwriting, the note read, "Leave before the whispers claim you." Eleanor's heart thudded loudly in the quiet room. The note trembled slightly in her hand as she refolded it, a chill running down her spine. The scent of burning lavender mingled with the faint metallic tang of the note, thickening the air like an invisible fog. She turned away from the wardrobe, glancing once more at the mirror. The glass reflected her with a strange dullness, as if it was losing its usual sharpness. Then, just as she blinked, she thought she heard a soft, nearly inaudible voice. A whisper. Almost lost in the crackling silence. She froze. Her breath held tight in her lungs. "Don't close your eyes." The whisper seemed to come from the shadows themselves, curling around the corners of the room. The candle flickered violently as if struggling against an unseen breath. Eleanor shook her head, trying to steady her nerves. "I'm just tired," she told herself. "It's just this place playing tricks." But even as she said it, the whisper came again, so faint she almost thought she imagined it. "They never left." Her gaze darted toward the bed. The quilt looked too pristine, too new. As if it had been made just moments ago. She swallowed hard. The room seemed to pulse, slow and steady, like the beat of a heart. The candle sputtered. Eleanor knew, deep down, sleep wouldn't come easy here. The whisper still lingered, echoing softly in the corners of Eleanor's mind as she edged toward the bed. The candlelight stretched long shadows across the floorboards, making familiar shapes twist into unfamiliar forms. Her eyes fell to the space beneath the bed, a dark hollow framed by carved legs. For a moment, she thought she saw movement there. Just a flicker, like a shadow detaching itself from the darkness. Heart pounding, she knelt down and peered under. The floor beneath was bare wood, scuffed and worn. Nothing but dust. But then a cold, faint breeze brushed her fingers. She pulled back sharply, blinking. The shadows seemed to pulse and writhe beneath the bed, shifting like living things. Eleanor pressed her palm against the floorboard, searching for warmth or motion, but found none. Then a whisper, so close it might have been her own breath. "Look deeper." Her fingers curled into the dust. There, just out of reach, was something small and hard. A button? A coin? She stretched out her hand, carefully reaching beneath. Her fingers closed on something cold and round. She pulled it out. A small, tarnished locket lay in her palm, its surface dull with age. She opened it, revealing a faded photograph inside, a young woman, her eyes hauntingly familiar, staring straight ahead. Eleanor's breath hitched. The woman in the photo was wearing the same tattered nightgown she'd seen in the mirror, the one pressed against the wall. The locket felt heavier than it should. Like it carried a story too large for its size. She closed it slowly. A chill wind swept through the room, and the candle flickered out. Darkness swallowed everything. Darkness closed around Eleanor like a heavy curtain. Her eyes strained to adjust, but the blackness was complete, as if the room itself had been swallowed whole. She heard it then, the faintest sound. A breath, soft and deliberate, close to her ear. She froze. A whisper, barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "Don't sleep." The air grew colder, wrapping around her like invisible fingers. The scent of lavender, faint and smoky, crept back, thicker now, clinging to her skin. She fumbled for the candle, but the matchbox was empty. The small flame had been her only anchor, and now it was gone. "Hello?" she whispered into the dark. No answer. Just the echo of her own voice, swallowed by the shadows. A movement caught her eye, just the faintest shimmer, like heat rising from a fire long dead. The mirror stood against the wall, its surface glinting faintly. For a moment, Eleanor thought she saw her own reflection, but then the image shifted, distorted, twisted. Her reflection's eyes were hollow, black pits, and its mouth moved silently, forming words she couldn't hear. A chill ran down her spine. She stumbled backward, her hands searching for something solid. The bedpost. She grasped it tightly and whispered, "I won't sleep." But the room was already awake. Eleanor's breath came in shallow gasps as the darkness pressed in around her. The room, though pitch black, felt alive, heavy with unseen eyes. Every nerve screamed that she was not alone. She clutched the bedpost, nails digging into the worn wood. Her ears strained for any sound beyond her ragged breathing. Then, there it was. A soft rustle, almost imperceptible, coming from the corner near the wardrobe. Eleanor turned slowly, the memory of the note still burning in her mind. "Leave before the whispers claim you." The shadows by the wardrobe shifted, coalescing into a shape. For a moment, she thought it might be her own imagination playing tricks. But no. Something dark moved, gliding just beyond the edge of the candle's reach. A presence. Watching. The air grew colder still, and the faint scent of burning lavender grew stronger, curling around her like smoke from a dying fire. A voice echoed softly, so close it seemed to come from inside her head. "You should have never come." Eleanor's heart thundered as the shape stepped forward, but before she could see its face, a sudden noise shattered the silence, a loud bang from the hallway outside the room. She jumped, startled. Footsteps, fast, heavy, approached the door. Eleanor scrambled back, her hands searching desperately for the key, for anything to protect herself. The footsteps stopped. Silence. And then, a slow, deliberate knock. "Room 313, the voice whispered, cold as the grave. Eleanor's heart pounded as the knocking echoed through the thick door. She swallowed hard, gripping the bedpost like a lifeline. "Who's there?" she called out, voice trembling. No answer. Just another knock, this time slower, more deliberate. "Please," she whispered, "I'm trapped. Please help." Silence. Her eyes darted around the room, desperate for any weapon or way out. The mirror reflected the dim shape of the visitor standing just beyond the door, though when she looked directly, nothing was there. The candle flickered weakly, shadows dancing across the walls. A soft sigh floated under the door. Then, the handle turned slowly. Eleanor stepped back, breath hitching. The door creaked open, and in stepped a figure cloaked in gray. The visitor's face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, shadowed and unreadable. "Come with me," the visitor said softly, voice like dry leaves brushing stone. Eleanor hesitated. Fear battled curiosity. "Who are you?" she asked. The visitor lifted a pale hand, beckoning. "Someone who knows the stories this place keeps," the visitor replied. And with that, Eleanor stepped into the hallway. The hallway was dimly lit by flickering gas lamps mounted on cracked plaster walls. The visitor led Eleanor down the long corridor, their footsteps echoing softly on the threadbare carpet. Eleanor stole glances at the figure, whose face remained hidden beneath the shadow of the wide-brimmed hat. The visitor's presence was oddly comforting amid the growing unease. "Why did you come here?" the visitor finally asked, voice low and gravelly. Eleanor hesitated. "My car broke down," she said. "I was just looking for shelter." The visitor nodded slowly. "This place chooses its guests carefully. It remembers." "Remembers what?" Eleanor asked, voice barely a whisper. "Stories," the visitor replied. "Whispers. Secrets of those who stayed, and those who never left." As they passed door after door, Eleanor noticed faded nameplates, some scratched beyond recognition, others stained with dark patches she dared not touch. They stopped before a door marked 314. The visitor paused and glanced at Eleanor. "Each room holds a piece of the past," they said. "Room 313 is special. It holds a memory that wants to be freed, or trapped forever." Eleanor swallowed hard. The visitor's words settled heavily in the air. A faint whisper drifted from behind the walls, and Eleanor shivered. The visitor turned away from the door and beckoned Eleanor forward. Their footsteps grew lighter, almost gliding over the worn carpet. "Room 313 holds a memory on the edge of breaking," the visitor said softly. "A story paused between life and death. It calls to those who listen." Eleanor swallowed, her gaze fixed on the door she'd left behind. "Why me?" she asked quietly. The visitor's shadow shifted. "Because you hear the whispers. Because you see the things others don't." As they moved, the walls seemed to pulse subtly, as if breathing alongside them. Faint voices seeped through the plaster, half-remembered words and half-forgotten cries. They stopped at a landing overlooking the lobby below. The clock ticked loudly, each second reverberating through the hollow inn. "Time moves strangely here," the visitor said. "Minutes stretch and fold, shadows linger where light should be." Eleanor's eyes scanned the lobby's ancient woodwork, the cracked glass of the windows. Dust motes floated lazily in the thin shafts of sunlight that pierced the gloom. The visitor turned to face her. "To free the memory, you must face the edge." Eleanor's heart raced. "What edge?" The visitor smiled, a small, sad curl of the lips. "The edge between waking and sleeping, between this world and the next." Eleanor felt the weight of the visitor's words settle deep in her chest. The edge between waking and sleeping, between worlds. It sounded like the border of a nightmare, a place she never wanted to cross. Yet the inn seemed to pulse with that very boundary. The visitor's gaze softened. "The memory in room 313 is tethered there. It waits for someone to cross, to listen, and perhaps to set it free." Eleanor swallowed. "But, what happens if I don't?" The visitor's voice dropped to a whisper. "Then it will reach out to you. In your dreams, in your waking hours. The whispers will grow louder, and the shadows will no longer hide. The air seemed to thicken, the tick of the grandfather clock below echoing like a heartbeat. Eleanor glanced back toward room 313. The door was closed, silent, yet somehow alive. Am I ready for that? She asked herself aloud. The visitor nodded, as if they'd been waiting for her to ask. You must decide before the night deepens. The inn does not forget. It only waits. Eleanor stood in the dim hallway, the weight of the visitor's words pressing down like a heavy fog. The inn seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her decision. She glanced once more at the closed door of room 313, the place where whispers breathed between walls and shadows moved just out of sight. The visitor's voice was gentle but firm. You can leave. Walk away and forget. But the memory will remain, waiting for another. Eleanor's fingers curled into fists. The fear inside her warred with a strange curiosity, a need to understand, to help, or perhaps simply to survive. I don't know if I can, she admitted. The visitor nodded. Then come. Face the memory. Cross the edge. With a shaky breath, Eleanor pushed open the door to room 313. Inside, the air was thick, smelling of lavender and smoke. The candlelight flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for her. Her heart pounded. She stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind her, sealing her in. The journey had begun. Eleanor's breath came in quick, shallow bursts as she stepped fully into room 313. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing out the hallway, and any chance of escape. The air here was thick, scented with the lingering sharpness of lavender and old smoke, like a wound that never healed. The room had changed. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, stained dark with watermarks and something else, something that looked like dried blood. The bed was gone, replaced by a cold, stone slab that gleamed wet under a strange, flickering light that seemed to come from nowhere. In the corner, the mirror stood taller and wider than before, its glass rippling like water disturbed by a single drop. Eleanor approached cautiously, the floor creaking beneath her steps. Her reflection shimmered and wavered, then faded entirely. Instead, the mirror showed a new scene, a small figure huddled in the shadows, a woman with hollow eyes and a tattered nightgown pressed against a wall that seemed to breathe. A voice, soft, cracked, echoed from the glass. Help me. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the locket in her pocket. The memory was no longer just a story, it was alive, waiting. She knew she had to listen. Eleanor's eyes were fixed on the mirror as the scene inside shifted and deepened. The woman, pressed tightly against the breathing wall, seemed almost translucent, like smoke trapped in glass. Her eyes, wide and hollow, locked onto Eleanor's reflection. Help me, she whispered again, her voice fragile, as if carried on the edge of breaking. Eleanor's hand brushed the locket in her pocket, fingers trembling. She wanted to reach through the glass, to pull the woman free from whatever prison held her. But the barrier was thick, an invisible wall between worlds. The woman's lips moved silently, forming words Eleanor could not hear. Then, suddenly, the wall behind the woman cracked. Thin fissures spread like spiderwebs across the plaster, glowing faintly with a pale blue light. The woman's figure flickered, her form dissolving and reforming with every heartbeat. Remember me, she said, voice breaking through the silence like a sigh. Eleanor felt a pull in her chest, a sadness so profound it nearly knocked her to her knees. This was not just a memory, it was a soul trapped, begging for release. Her mind raced. How could she help? What was the story that bound this woman here? The mirror rippled once more, then went dark. A cold breath brushed against Eleanor's neck. Eleanor's skin prickled as the cold breath whispered along the back of her neck. She spun around, but the room was empty, save for the faint flicker of the candle on the desk. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken sorrow. She reached for the locket in her pocket and opened it again, the faded photo of the woman staring back at her. A sudden soft voice broke the silence. "Do you remember?" it asked, barely more than a sigh. Eleanor's heart pounded. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, wrapping around her like a chill wind. Who's there?" she whispered. The room shifted subtly. The walls seemed to breathe, the wallpaper curling as if alive. A shadow moved in the corner of her eye. The candle flickered out, plunging her into darkness. And in the pitch black, the whisper came again. "Find the names. Set us free." When the candle flickered back to life, Eleanor's eyes immediately scanned the room for anything new. Her gaze landed on the desk. Something wasn't there before. A small, leather-bound notebook lay open, its pages yellowed and worn. She stepped closer, heart hammering, and read the first page. A list of names, written in a careful, looping hand. Each name crossed out, except one. At the bottom of the page, the last name glowed faintly in the candlelight. Eleanor. She blinked, heart skipping. The names before hers were familiar. Some she recognized from the faded nameplates down the hallway, others were unfamiliar but carried a weight in the way they were written. The visitor's voice echoed softly in her mind. "Each name is a soul trapped, waiting to be remembered, to be freed." Eleanor traced her finger along the page. A sudden chill swept through the room. The whisper returned, clearer this time. "Find us. Remember us. Let us go." The journey was far from over. Eleanor's eyes lingered on the names, her breath shallow. Each name was like a ghost whispering from the past, forgotten guests trapped in the walls, the floors, the very fabric of the inn. She turned the pages carefully. Alongside names were brief notes, faded and cryptic. Lost to the fire. Never found. Silent in the night. Her fingers trembled as she reached a name marked with a small red cross. A note read, "Remember her. The one in the nightgown." Eleanor's mind raced back to the woman in the mirror. The pale figure pressed against the wall, eyes hollow and desperate. Was she one of the forgotten? Had she been trapped here for years, decades, maybe longer? The candle sputtered again, casting shadows that seemed to flicker and twist into faces, silent, pleading. A sudden gust slammed the door shut, making Eleanor jump. The room seemed to pulse with a new urgency. She whispered, "I'll find you. I'll remember." And somewhere in the walls, a soft, grateful sigh echoed. Eleanor pressed her hand against the cold desk, her breath steadying as the room's energy shifted. The flickering candlelight revealed the edges of old photographs pinned beneath the notebook's worn pages. She carefully pulled one free, a black and white image, edges torn, showing a group of people standing before the inn. Their faces were solemn, Eleanor's fingers tightened on the photograph. The weight of their suffering settled heavy in her chest. Her resolve deepened. She had come here seeking refuge. Now, she was trapped in their memory, chosen to be the voice for the forgotten. But the question lingered, how? Eleanor's eyes scanned the room again, searching for anything she might have missed. The worn floorboards creaked softly under her feet. Her gaze dropped to the corner near the bed, the very spot where she had found the locket earlier. Something tugged at her attention. She knelt down, running her fingers over the rough wood, tracing the lines of the grain. Suddenly, her fingertips brushed against something smooth and cold. A small metal key, tucked into a crack between two floorboards. She pulled it free, feeling its weight in her palm, a heavy, old-fashioned key with intricate engravings curling around its shaft. Her heart quickened. What did it unlock? Her eyes darted around the room. There. Near the desk. A small locked box sat almost hidden beneath scattered papers. Eleanor moved quickly to the box and slid the key into the lock. With a soft click, the lid opened. Inside lay a bundle of yellowed letters, tied with a faded ribbon. She lifted one, unfolding the brittle paper. The handwriting was spidery but clear. If you find this, please remember us. We were forgotten, but not gone. A shiver ran down her spine. The past was reaching out, and Eleanor was caught in its grasp. Eleanor's hands trembled as she carefully unfolded the fragile letter. The ink was faded but still legible, a sorrowful script penned decades ago. To whoever finds these words, we are trapped here, bound by secrets and silence. The fire took our voices, but not our memories. Remember us, tell our stories, and free us from this endless night. She lifted the next letter, and then the next. Each told fragments of a terrible tale, stories of lost love, betrayal, and a fire that consumed lives and hopes alike. One letter spoke of a woman named Clara, trapped in the very room Eleanor occupied, a woman who vanished without a trace, her spirit lingering in the shadows. Another detailed a desperate plea from a man named Thomas, who tried to save Clara but was silenced by the darkness that claimed the inn. Eleanor's chest tightened with each word. These were not just letters, they were echoes of lives cut short, voices crying out through time. She folded the letters gently, clutching them to her chest. The room seemed to breathe around her, the whispers now a chorus of gratitude and hope. Eleanor knew her path was clear. She would remember. She would tell their stories. And she would set them free. As the old clock in the lobby struck midnight, Eleanor felt a strange stillness settle over the inn. The whispered voices softened, as if holding their breath, waiting. She sat on the edge of the cold stone slab, clutching the letters tightly. The candle flickered, casting long, wavering shadows that stretched and twisted like spectral fingers reaching out to her. Outside, the fog thickened, pressing against the windows like a living thing desperate to get inside. A sudden chill swept through the room, and the temperature dropped sharply. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, the weight of the past pressing down heavier with each passing second. Then, a faint melody began to drift through the air, a lullaby, haunting and fragile, carried on the wind. Her eyes widened as the mirror rippled again, revealing the pale woman in the nightgown once more. The woman's lips moved silently, and this time, Eleanor could hear the faintest whisper. "Thank you for remembering." The clock ticked once more. The midnight hour had arrived. The lullaby faded into silence as Eleanor's eyes remained locked on the shimmering mirror. The pale woman's figure began to glow softly, light spilling from her form like moonlight through fog. Slowly, the woman stepped forward, not from the glass, but from the shadows themselves. Her feet never touched the floor, she hovered inches above it, ethereal and fragile. "Who are you?" Eleanor whispered, voice trembling. The woman's hollow eyes softened. "I am Clara. I was trapped here for decades, forgotten by the world and by time." Eleanor's fingers clenched the locket tightly. "I found your story. Your letters. I will help you." Clara nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "You must speak our names aloud. Tell our stories to break the chains." A gust of wind swept through the room, carrying with it the voices of the forgotten, soft, urgent, pleading. Eleanor took a deep breath. "I will remember. I will free you." The room pulsed with light and shadow, and the boundary between past and present began to blur. The awakening had begun. Eleanor's voice echoed softly in the room as she began to speak the names written in the leather-bound notebook. Clara, Thomas, Eleanor, and the others lost to time. Each name carried weight, each syllable releasing a breath held for decades. As she spoke, the air around her thickened, shimmering with unseen energy. The shadows that had clung to the corners of the room began to lift, swirling into shapes, faces, smiles, tears, manifesting the memories of those trapped souls. Clara's figure grew brighter, her translucent form solidifying with every name uttered. The walls seemed to breathe relief as the stories wove a tapestry of remembrance. the whispers transformed from mournful sighs into a harmonious chorus. "Thank you," they murmured, voices mingling like wind through leaves. Eleanor's heart ached with both sorrow and hope. She was no longer just a visitor, she was the keeper of their memories, the voice that could break the silence. But with the voices unbound came a sudden rush of cold, as if the very fabric of the inn was shifting. The journey was far from over. As the chorus of voices swelled, the warm light that filled room 313 began to flicker and dim. The shadows, once pushed aside by Eleanor's words, gathered strength in the corners, coalescing into a dense, swirling blackness that crept along the walls like ink spreading through water. A low growl rumbled beneath the floorboards, vibrating through Eleanor's bones. The air thickened, heavy with menace. From the depths of the darkness, shapes began to emerge, twisted forms with hollow eyes, their mouths stretched in silent screams. They writhed, desperate to reclaim the room, to snatch back the memories Eleanor had freed. Eleanor's pulse quickened. The locket in her hand grew cold, its surface prickling with unseen energy. Clara's voice cut through the rising chaos, clear and commanding. "Do not let the darkness take hold. Remember us. Hold on to our light." Eleanor steadied herself, gripping the locket tightly, focusing on the names etched in her memory. The battle between light and shadow had begun, and the fate of the forgotten depended on her resolve. Eleanor's breath hitched as the darkness surged closer, tendrils of shadow creeping like living smoke around her feet. The room felt alive with tension, a fragile battleground between despair and hope. She held the locket high, the faint glow it emitted a small beacon against the swallowing blackness. "Remember," she whispered, voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Remember who you are." One by one, the names she had spoken seemed to shine from within her mind, bright points of light piercing the dark. The twisted shadows recoiled, their shapes dissolving into wisps of smoke that vanished into the air. Clara's form glowed with renewed strength, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You've given us hope," Clara said softly. "But the night is not yet over." Eleanor knew the road ahead would be long, but for the first time, she felt the power of memory as a shield. A light strong enough to challenge the darkness. The room settled into a fragile calm. Eleanor sank onto the cold stone slab, the candlelight flickering gently as if tired from the battle it had witnessed. Outside, the fog pressed silently against the windows, an ever-present reminder of the world beyond these haunted walls. Clara's translucent form lingered nearby, her gaze soft but filled with quiet strength. "You have done much," she said. "But the night watches still. The memories you freed will need your voice, your courage." Eleanor nodded, feeling the weight of the task settling upon her shoulders. This was no simple escape, it was a vigil, a promise to carry the stories forward. The whispers returned, not mournful this time, but calm, like a lullaby of souls finally at rest. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, letting the gentle chorus soothe her racing mind. When she opened them again, the candle was steady, its flame unwavering. She was ready to face whatever came next. The morning light was slow to reach the depths of the inn, and Eleanor felt the weight of the night's vigil still heavy in her bones. As she rose from the cold slab, Clara's figure flickered beside her, a gentle presence now more friend than ghost. Eleanor stepped toward the door, but before she could open it, a narrow corridor revealed itself, one she hadn't noticed before. The wallpaper was faded, torn in places, and the air smelled of dust and secrets. Drawn by an unseen force, Eleanor followed the corridor's winding path. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, and whispers, soft, almost playful, echoed off the walls. At the corridor's end stood a heavy wooden door, its surface carved with strange symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Eleanor reached out and pressed her palm to the door. A warmth spread through her fingers. The visitor's voice whispered in her memory, "This door leads to the heart of the inn's secret." Taking a steadying breath, Eleanor turned the handle. Beyond lay a darkness waiting to be unraveled. Eleanor pushed the heavy door open, the hinges groaning as if disturbed after years of silence. The room beyond was vast and shadowed, filled with the scent of old wood, dust, and a faint trace of something metallic. Faint light spilled in from cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting long, thin beams that illuminated motes of dust swirling like restless spirits. At the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, taller and wider than any Eleanor had seen before. Its surface rippled like a dark pool, reflecting not just the room but flickers of distant places and times. Clara's voice echoed softly in the chamber. "This is the heart," she said. "Where the memories of the gather and pulse. Where the forgotten linger, and the lost are kept." Eleanor approached the mirror, the air thick with anticipation. She felt a tug deep within her soul. A call to step beyond the glass, to enter the realm of the inn's memories and confront what had been hidden for so long. The surface shimmered invitingly. Eleanor hesitated. Then, with a steady breath, she reached out. Eleanor's fingers brushed the surface of the mirror, and a shiver ran through her body as the glass rippled beneath her touch. The reflection warped and twisted, revealing not her own image but a swirling mist of memories, fragments of laughter, cries, and footsteps long faded into silence. Slowly, the mirror's surface began to pull her in, a gentle tug that she could not resist. The room around her blurred and dissolved, replaced by a landscape of shifting shadows and half-remembered scenes. She found herself standing in a dimly lit hallway, the very corridor she had walked before, but now alive with echoes of the past. Faint figures moved at the edges of her vision, glimpses of lives trapped between moments. A voice whispered her name, soft and urgent. "Eleanor, remember." Her heart pounded as she stepped forward, the veil between worlds thinner than ever. She knew this was the moment to face the inn's deepest secrets. Eleanor walked down the shimmering hallway, shadows flickering like restless spirits along the walls. The air was thick with whispers, fragments of conversations, cries, laughter, all trapped in the web of memory. She paused as a soft sobbing sound floated nearby. Turning a corner, she saw a young girl sitting on the floor, her knees drawn to her chest, tears streaming down her pale face. "Who are you?" Eleanor asked gently. The girl looked up, eyes wide and filled with fear. "I'm Lily. I got lost, and I can't find my way home." Eleanor's heart clenched. "I'll help you." As she reached out, the scene flickered, and the girl's form dissolved into mist. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead, filled with more faces, lost souls waiting to be remembered, to be freed. Eleanor realized the true weight of her task. This was not just about one story. It was about all of them. With renewed determination, she moved forward, ready to confront the echoes of the lost. As Eleanor pressed onward, the air grew colder, heavier. The whispers around her grew frantic, voices tangled in fear and despair. Suddenly, shadows spilled from the walls, thick and writhing like serpents, wrapping around the figures trapped in the corridor. The lost souls struggled, their faces contorted with silent screams. Eleanor's heart pounded fiercely. She raised the locket high, its faint glow cutting through the darkness. "Remember," she called out, voice echoing. The shadows recoiled, writhing and shrinking under the light, but they fought back fiercely, coiling tighter around the trapped souls. Clara's voice echoed in her mind, "Hold fast. They feed on forgetting." With every name Eleanor spoke aloud, the shadows weakened, their grip loosening. Slowly, the lost began to glow, their forms solidifying as memories reclaimed. Eleanor felt her strength waning but pressed on. This battle between light and shadow would decide their fate. Eleanor's voice grew stronger, each name she spoke a thread unraveling the darkness. The shadows hissed and recoiled, their grip loosening on the trapped souls, until with a final, shuddering gasp, the chains of shadow shattered like glass. Light flooded the corridor, bathing the lost in a warm, golden glow. Their faces softened, relief washing over them as the bonds that had held them snapped free. Clara appeared beside Eleanor, her form more solid, eyes shining with gratitude. "You've done what no one else could," she said softly. "You have broken the chains." The lost souls gathered, their voices now clear and harmonious. "Thank you," they chorused. Eleanor felt a surge of peace, but also a deep exhaustion settling over her. "Is it over?" she asked. Clara shook her head gently. "The past is freed, but the inn still holds secrets. You have only begun." Eleanor followed Clara through the now glowing corridor, the warmth of the freed souls lingering like a gentle breeze. Yet, ahead, a new obstacle awaited, a door unlike any other she had seen. This one was silent, its surface smooth and unmarked, no handle, no keyhole, nothing to suggest it could be opened. Clara's voice was soft but grave. "This door holds the final secret. The truth the inn guards most fiercely." Eleanor reached out, pressing her palm against the cold wood. A faint pulse thrummed beneath her fingertips. Suddenly, the whisper returned, a chorus of voices urging her. "Remember, face it, free us." The silence was thick, oppressive. Eleanor took a deep breath, preparing to confront whatever lay beyond. With a steady hand, she pressed harder, and the door began to shimmer, its surface dissolving like mist. Beyond lay darkness, and the final memory waiting to be revealed. Eleanor stepped through the dissolving doorway into a space unlike any she had known. A vast emptiness filled with swirling shadows and shards of light. Here, time seemed to lose meaning, past and present folding together in a kaleidoscope of forgotten moments. At the center floated a figure cloaked in darkness, face obscured but radiating sorrow. Clara's voice echoed softly beside Eleanor. "This is the heart of the inn's pain, the source of the whispers." Eleanor felt the weight of countless stories pressing upon her, a river of grief and longing flowing through the void. With courage steadying her, she reached out. The figure's face emerged, a reflection of the inn itself, beautiful yet broken, alive with memories yet burdened by loss. "I am the keeper of the forgotten," the figure whispered. "Release me, and the inn will finally rest." Eleanor knew what she had to do. With a voice steady and clear, she began to speak, speaking not just names, but stories, memories, love, and loss, giving life back to the forgotten and peace to the restless. As Eleanor's voice wove the stories into the vast emptiness, the swirling shadows softened and began to coalesce into shapes of warmth and light. Faces long forgotten emerged, smiling, weeping, embracing, each memory restoring a piece of the shattered heart. The keeper of the forgotten lifted its veil, revealing a face serene and gentle, no longer burdened by sorrow but freed by remembrance. The swirling void brightened, colors blooming like dawn breaking over a darkened sky. A wave of peace rolled through the space, washing over Eleanor like a gentle tide. She felt the weight lift from her chest, replaced by a calm she had never known. Clara appeared beside her, radiant and whole. "You have done what no one else dared. You have given the inn its soul back." Eleanor smiled, tears tracing warm paths down her cheeks. "It's time for rest. For all of us." The inn sighed, a deep, contented breath, and the shadows melted away. Light spilled gently through the cracked window of room 313, painting golden streaks across the worn floorboards. The heavy silence that had hung for so long was replaced by a soft stillness, one of peace, of endings and beginnings. Eleanor sat quietly on the edge of the bed, feeling the warmth of the morning sun on her face. The locket in her hand gleamed softly, a quiet reminder of the journey she had undertaken. Clara's figure shimmered nearby, no longer ghostly but luminous, as if freed from the weight of the past. "Thank you," Clara whispered, her voice like a breeze through leaves. "Because of you, we can rest." Eleanor nodded, a sense of fulfillment filling her heart. She stood slowly, the room feeling lighter, almost welcoming. As she reached the door, she glanced back one last time. The mirror reflected not shadows or whispers, but a calm, bright room bathed in morning light. Stepping into the hallway, Eleanor felt the inn's atmosphere shift. The heavy air lifted, replaced by something gentle, almost hopeful. Her journey was ending, but the story she carried would live on. Eleanor walked slowly down the corridor, the soft light of dawn filtering through stained glass windows and casting colorful patterns on the faded walls. The once oppressive atmosphere of the inn had transformed, gone was the thick heaviness, replaced by a fragile sense of peace. She paused near the grand staircase, hearing faint echoes of laughter and music, ghostly remnants of joyful moments long past. The visitor appeared beside her, face now fully visible, lined with age but softened by gratitude. "You have freed the inn from its burden," the visitor said gently. "Few have the courage to face such darkness." Then, with a deep breath, she stepped out into the morning light, ready to carry the stories forward, and to never forget. Eleanor stepped beyond the inn's heavy front doors, the cool morning air brushing against her skin like a promise. The sun was rising, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, a new day breaking over the horizon. She carried with her the weight of the inn's stories, a sacred trust now etched into her soul. The names, the faces, the memories, they would no longer be whispers lost in time. As she walked down the path away from the inn, the visitor's words echoed gently in her mind: "Carry the light. Tell the stories. Keep the memories alive." Eleanor looked back once, seeing the inn bathed in dawn's glow, peaceful and whole for the first time in decades. Her heart swelled with a quiet resolve. The journey had changed her forever. And now, it was time to begin anew. Days passed, and Eleanor found herself returning often to the stories she had uncovered. She began to write, weaving the voices of the forgotten into pages that would give them life beyond the inn's walls. Each tale was a thread in a larger tapestry, a tapestry of sorrow, hope, and redemption. But even as she shared their stories, Eleanor sensed the echoes still lingered. Sometimes, late at night, she would hear a faint whisper just beyond the edge of sleep, a soft murmur reminding her of the promise she'd made. The inn's secrets had become part of her, a living memory that would continue to shape her path. And in that, Eleanor found a strange comfort. For while some stories end in silence, others live on, whispering softly into the future. One quiet evening, as Eleanor sat by her window writing, a gentle breeze stirred the curtains. The room filled with a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Thank you." Eleanor paused, the words hanging in the air like a fragile thread connecting her to the past. She smiled softly, knowing that though the inn was at peace, its stories, and its gratitude, would live on in her voice. The shadows had faded, but the whispers remained, not as threats, but as gentle echoes of remembrance. Eleanor closed her journal, the weight of the journey settling warmly in her heart. She was ready, for whatever came next. The days grew warmer, the seasons shifting gently as Eleanor carried on her life, marked forever by the stories she had embraced. The inn's whispers had quieted to a soft hum, a distant lullaby that soothed her nights. She found peace not in forgetting, but in remembering. Neighbors noticed the change in her, her calm strength, her quiet kindness. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, Eleanor could swear she heard the faintest laughter carried from faraway rooms, an echo of lives freed at last. Her heart, once heavy with sorrow and fear, now beat with a steady rhythm of hope. At last, the past was at rest. And so was she. Eleanor stood once more at the threshold of the inn, the place that had held her captive and set her free. The heavy doors closed gently behind her, their final sound a soft sigh, like the closing of a long-forgotten chapter. She carried no fear now, only gratitude for the journey that had led her to understand the power of memory, story, and light in the darkest places. The locket rested against her heart, warm and steady. As she walked away, the inn faded softly behind her, bathed in the golden glow of the rising sun, a beacon of peace and remembrance. The whispers had become a song she would carry forever. And so, Eleanor's story, and the stories of those who had come before, would never be forgotten. The end.